Evelyn Carter slammed both palms against that rotting porch railing and screamed into the empty Wyoming morning. Not for help, not for mercy, but because the baby inside that house had been crying for 20 solid minutes, and not one soul had come. She didn't know these people. She didn't know this ranch. She had 43 cents in her coat pocket and a 3-day hunger sitting heavy in her gut. But that cry, Lord, that cry, pulled something loose inside her chest that no amount of road walking had managed to kill. If this story moves, you hit that subscribe button right now and follow along until the very end. Drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. Every single comment means the world to this channel, and I read every one. The road into Hollow Creek had been unkind that morning. Evelyn had been walking since before the sun cleared the ridge, her boots raising little clouds of pale dust, with every step her travel bag cutting into her left shoulder where the strap had worn thin. Wyoming in late June was no country for a woman on foot. The sky overhead was that brutal washed-out blue that offered no shade and no mercy, and the heat came up off the dirt road in slow, shimmering waves that made the distance look twice as far as it was. She hadn't eaten since the half loaf of bread a churchwoman in Rawlins had pressed into her hands 2 days ago. She'd made it last. She knew how to make things last. That was one skill the road had taught her well. She wasn't looking for work. She wasn't looking for charity. She'd learned the hard way that looking for either one tended to put you in a position where somebody else held the power over whether you ate or slept dry that night, and Evelyn Carter had decided somewhere back around the Colorado border that she was done letting other people hold that kind of power over her. She was just walking, moving, putting distance between herself and everything that had gone wrong, which was most things and most places she'd been in the last 2 years. The ranch appeared around a bend in the road, the way a lot of heartbreak appears, without warning, without giving you time to prepare yourself for what you were about to see. It had been a good spread once. She could tell that much. The bones of the place were solid wide plank fencing that had gone gray but still stood straight, a barn big enough to shelter 20 head comfortable, a house with a real porch and a real roof and windows that caught the morning light. But something had gone out of it. The kitchen garden was choked with weeds. 2 fence posts along the near paddock had given way, and the wire sagged between them. A saddle had been left draped over the porch railing so long that the leather had cracked in the sun. Evelyn walked past it without slowing down. It wasn't her business. None of it was her business. She had 43 cents and a long road ahead, and exactly 0 reasons to stop at a stranger's ranch and invite whatever trouble came with knocking on doors she had no claim to. She had made it maybe 30 yards past the front gate when she heard the baby. Not a little fussing. Not the half-hearted complaint of an infant who wanted to be picked up. This was a full, raw, desperate cry, the kind that climbed up the back of your neck and grabbed hold, the kind that said something was genuinely wrong and had been wrong for longer than it should have been. Evelyn stopped walking. She stood there in this road with the dust settling around her boots and the sun bearing down on the back of her neck, and she told herself it was not her problem. People had babies. Babies cried. There was a whole house full of people in there who were responsible for that child, and none of them were her. The crying didn't stop. She turned around. She told herself later that she didn't decide to go back. She just found herself going back the way you find yourself doing something your body understood before your mind caught up. She pushed through the front gate, crossed the yard, climbed the 2 porch steps, and raised her fist to knock. The door swung open before her knuckles landed. The man standing there was big, not soft. Big, but the kind of big that came from years of hard work, wide through the shoulders, hands that looked like they'd been built for moving things that didn't want to move. He had dark hair that needed cutting and several days of growth on his jaw, and eyes that were the color of creek water in August gray-green, and tired in a way that had nothing to do with how much sleep he'd gotten the night before. He was holding a screaming infant against his chest with one arm, and had flour on his shirt, and a look on his face that said he was about 4 minutes from the end of everything he had left. He looked at Evelyn. Evelyn looked at him. "The baby's hungry," she said. It wasn't a question. The man blinked. Who in the... He stopped himself, shifted the screaming infant to his other arm, and tried again. Who are you? My name's Evelyn Carter. I was passing on the road. She nodded toward the gate. I could hear her from out there. Her name's Clara. He said it like that was both an explanation and an accusation. She won't take the bottle. She's been like this for... He broke off, pressed his lips together. I've tried everything I know how to try. How old is she? 7 months. Evelyn set her travel bag down on the porch. You got any oatmeal in the house? The man stared at her. What? Oatmeal. Or cornmeal. Something soft. 7 months she's past needing only milk. She needs something with weight to it. Evelyn looked at him steadily. You got a kitchen? Lady, I don't know you from... No, you don't. Evelyn agreed. But that baby's been screaming for the better part of half an hour, and she's working herself up towards something worse. Now, do you got oatmeal or not? Something shifted in the man's face. Not trust, not yet, not anywhere close to trust, but something that looked like a man who had run completely out of other options and had just noticed it. Come in, he said. The kitchen was the kind of mess that happened when someone was doing the work of 4 people and only had the hands of 1. Dishes stacked on the counter, a pot of something burned on the stove, a half-eaten piece of bread on the table, next to a tin cup of cold coffee. 2 older children girls. Evelyn figured one about 8, and one about 11 sat at the table watching her come through the door with expressions that were identical in their wariness. The older one spoke first. Pa. Who is she? Sadie. The man's voice carried a warning in it. Mind your manners. I'm just asking who she is. Evelyn Carter, Evelyn said before he could answer. She looked at the girl directly. I was walking past on the road. I heard the baby. She looked around the kitchen, once taking it in, then moved toward the stove. Where do you keep your oatmeal? Sadie pointed to the cabinet on the left without seeming to intend to. Then she caught herself pointing and pulled her hand back. You can't just come in and start going through our things. You're right. Evelyn turned and looked at the man. It's your kitchen. I won't touch a thing unless you ask me to. But that baby needs to eat, and I know how to make that happen, and it seems like you could use the help. The man looked at her for a long moment. Clara was still crying, red-faced and furious, her tiny fists curled against his chest. Caleb Hayes, he said finally. Not a greeting, exactly, more like a man stating a fact. Like he was marking down in some ledger that this had happened. This is my ranch. I know it's your ranch, Mr. Hayes. Evelyn had already found the oatmeal. She was already measuring water into a small pot. I'm not here to take anything from you. I'll cook the baby something to eat, and if you want me off your property after that, I'll go. She heard him exhale behind her, heard the creak of a chair as he sat down. The baby's crying shifted, not quieter yet, but different, like Clara had sensed something change in the room. That's my daughter Sadie, Caleb said, and his voice had lost some of its edge. Just some. And that's Clara, the one you already know about. The boys are out back somewhere. Tommy's 9 and Robert's 6. He paused. Their mother passed 8 months ago. Evelyn didn't turn around. She kept her eyes on the pot and her hands steady, and she said, I'm sorry for your loss, Mr. Hayes. And she meant it. And she didn't say anything more than that, because some griefs didn't need language piled on top of them. You got anywhere to be? He asked. Today, I mean. Just the road. The kitchen was quiet, except for the sound of Clara beginning very gradually to wind down. Sadie was still watching Evelyn from across the table with those careful, suspicious eyes. She had her father's coloring dark hair, gray-green eyes, but her expression was older than 11 had any right to be. She'd been carrying something heavy for a long time. Evelyn recognized the weight of it because she'd worn it herself. You know how to cook, Sadie said. Not rude. Measuring. I do. Our last cook left in April. Sadie glanced at her father, then back to Evelyn. Said it was too much work for too little pay. Sadie. Caleb's voice again. It's true, Pa. It's true. he agreed quietly. Doesn't mean you need to announce it to every stranger who walks through the door. She's the one standing in our kitchen, Sadie said reasonably. Evelyn couldn't help it. The corner of her mouth moved, just barely. She's got a point. Caleb looked at her. For the first time there was something in his face that wasn't exhaustion or suspicion, something almost human. Yeah, he said. She usually does. The oatmeal came together quickly. She added a little brown sugar from the crock on the shelf, a pinch of cinnamon she found next to it, mashed it smooth until it was the right consistency. She turned and held out her hands for Clara. Caleb hesitated for exactly 2 seconds. Then he passed the baby over. Clara was heavier than she looked, solid little thing, still shuddering from crying, her face splotched red. Evelyn settled her in the crook of her left arm, the way she'd done with babies before, secure and matter-of-fact, and picked up the small spoon. "Hey there, Clara," she said quietly. "Hey, look here." Clara looked. Babies always looked when you changed the energy in the room. It was one of the things Evelyn had always known about them. She offered the spoon. Clara ate. The silence in the kitchen was so complete that Evelyn could hear the wind moving through the grass outside. She heard Caleb exhale long and slow, like a man releasing something he'd been holding in his chest for months. She heard Sadie shift in her chair. The younger girl, the one whose name she hadn't learned yet, had fallen asleep at the table, with her cheek pressed against her arm. "That's Lily," Caleb said quietly, nodding at the sleeping girl. "She's 5. She cried herself to sleep about an hour ago. She's worn out. We all are." Evelyn kept feeding Clara in small, patient spoonfuls. "You got any help out here, family nearby? My brother Wade comes when he can. He's got his own spread about 8 miles east." Caleb's hands were resting on the table. Big scarred hands, the kind that knew what work was. "He's been out here twice this week already. He's got his own problems." "Hired hands?" "2. They handle the cattle. That's all I can pay them for." He was quiet for a moment. "The house is—" He stopped. "The house is what it is," Evelyn said. "That's all right." "It's not all right," he said. And he said it flat, not fishing for sympathy, just stating a fact the way a man who'd spent his whole life dealing with facts stated them. 8 months ago, I had a wife who ran this house. Now I've got 4 children who need feeding and a kitchen I can't keep on top of, and a ranch that needs more hours than I've got in a day." Evelyn looked at him across the table. Clara had settled into a steady rhythm of eating, her small fist curled around the air. "I can cook supper," Evelyn said. Caleb looked at her carefully. "Just supper. To start." She kept her voice even. "You feed me and let me sleep in whatever outbuilding you've got. I'll do the cooking and what help I can with the children. You don't owe me wages, just a roof and a meal." Sadie had gone very still on the far side of the table. "You'd work for room and board," Caleb said slowly. "Yes." "Why?" It was the question she'd known was coming. She'd been ready for it. "Because I'm tired," she said. "Because I've been walking for a long time and I'm hungry, and that baby needed somebody and I happened to be passing." She looked at him steadily. "And because I know how to do this kind of work, and you clearly need somebody who does." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Clara had finished the oatmeal and was sitting heavy and drowsy in Evelyn's arms, her eyes drooping. "How do I know you're not going to rob me blind and disappear?" he asked. Not mean honest, the question of a man who'd been left before and knew what it felt like. "You don't," Evelyn said. "But you know that baby just ate for the first time today, and she's about to sleep, and your daughter Lily's already out, and your kitchen's got somebody in it who knows what they're doing." She held his gaze. "That's all the proof I've got." He looked at her for a long time. Then he looked at Sadie. Sadie was watching Evelyn with those measuring eyes, taking her apart, putting her back together, arriving at some conclusion that an 11-year-old shouldn't have had to be arriving at. Finally, she said, "She held Clara right." Caleb's jaw moved. "Yeah. Mama used to hold her like that." The word landed in the kitchen like a stone dropped in still water. Nobody moved for a moment. Then Caleb said, "You can have the room off the kitchen. It's small. There's a cot." He pushed back from the table. "Supper's at 6. Evelyn looked down at the sleeping baby in her arms. "I'll need to know what you've got in the pantry." "Sadie'll show you." He was already moving toward the door. "I've got fence to see to before the afternoon gets away from me." He was almost out when Evelyn said, "Mr. Hayes?" He stopped, turned. "Thank you," she said. He looked at her for one more moment. That same long measuring look she was starting to understand was just the way he looked at things he hadn't figured out yet. Then he nodded once and walked out. Sadie got up from the table and came to stand in front of Evelyn with her arms crossed over her chest. Up close, she was taller than Evelyn had realized, and the wariness in her eyes was even more pronounced. But there was something else underneath it. Something that looked like a child who had been trying very hard to be the person in charge and was exhausted by it. "I'm watching you," Sadie said. "I know you are," Evelyn said. "I watch everybody who comes here." "That's smart." Sadie blinked. She'd been expecting something different, reassurance maybe, or irritation, not agreement. "You think so? Your father's got 4 children and a ranch and a brother who comes when he can. That makes you the second set of eyes in this house." Evelyn looked at her evenly. "I'd be worried if you weren't watching." Sadie's arms uncrossed slightly, just slightly. "Clara really does like to be held that way. I noticed. She screams when most people hold her. Some babies are particular," Evelyn said. "There's nothing wrong with that." Sadie looked at the sleeping baby, then back at Evelyn. Something shifted in her face, small but real. "The pantry's this way," she said, and turned and walked toward the back of the kitchen. Evelyn followed her, carrying Clara in the crook of her arm, the baby's small warm weight settling against her like something coming to rest after a long flight. Outside she could hear the wind in the grass, and somewhere distant the sound of Caleb Hayes moving across his land with the particular heavy-footed purpose of a man who had no choice but to keep moving. The summer spread out ahead of all of them, long and hot, and full of the kind of unknowns that either broke people or made them into something they hadn't known they could be. Evelyn didn't know yet which one it was going to be. But the baby was sleeping. The kitchen had a fire in it. And for the first time in longer than she could clearly remember, Evelyn Carter was standing still. Supper that first evening was cornbread, salt pork, and a pot of beans. Evelyn found soaking in a ceramic bowl under the counter. Somebody had started them that morning and forgotten to finish. She finished them. She added an onion she found going soft in the bottom of the vegetable crate, a dried chili pepper from the string hanging near the window, and enough salt to make the whole thing taste like it had been thought about. When Caleb came in from the fence line with mud on his boots and exhaustion written into every line of his face, he stopped in the kitchen doorway and just stood there for a moment, not saying anything. "Wash up," Evelyn said without turning from the stove. "Supper's in 10 minutes." He washed up. The boys came in behind him. Tommy first, 9 years old, and built like a smaller version of his father, serious and watchful, and Robert behind him, 6, with a gap where his front teeth should have been, and grass stains on both knees. They stopped when they saw Evelyn. Tommy's hand shot out and caught Robert's sleeve without him seeming to think about it. "Who's that?" Robert said. "Her name's Evelyn," Sadie said from her chair at the table. She said it with a proprietary air like she'd already made her assessment, and the boys would just have to catch up. "She's staying for supper?" Tommy asked. He was looking at Evelyn the way his father looked at things carefully, giving nothing away. "She's cooking supper," Caleb said, sitting down. "Wash your hands, both of you." Robert washed his hands and immediately went to stand next to Evelyn at the stove. He came up to about her elbow. He looked at the pot. He looked at her. He said, "That smells good?" "Thank you," Evelyn said. "Mama's beans smelled like that." He said it the way children say true things, simply without knowing what they're handing you. "With the pepper." Evelyn kept stirring. "Your mama knew her way around a kitchen." "Yeah." Robert leaned against the counter beside her. "You gonna stay?" "Robert," Caleb said. "I'm just asking." "It's all right," Evelyn said. She looked down at the boy. "I'm going to stay tonight. After that we'll see." Robert considered this with the gravity of a 6-year-old. "Okay," he said, and went to sit down. Tommy sat down without a word. He didn't take his eyes off Evelyn for most of the meal. The cornbread came out even. The beans were better than she'd hoped. She put Clara in the crook of her arm and fed the baby first small spoonfuls, while the rest of the family ate, and she watched the table out of the corner of her eye. Watched Caleb eat 3 servings without comment. Watched Robert talk with his mouth full, until Sadie told him not to watch Tommy eat with his head down, methodical and silent. Lily woke up when the food smell reached her and sat in her chair blinking, and Evelyn put a plate in front of her, and she ate without speaking, still half in sleep. Caleb waited until the children were done and pushing back from the table before he said anything. "You said you'd been on the road a while," he said. He wasn't looking at her directly. He was looking at his coffee cup. "Where from originally?" "Kansas," Evelyn said. "A long time ago." "You got family out there?" "Not anymore." He nodded, like that answered something he hadn't quite asked. "What happened, if you don't mind my asking?" "I mind a little," Evelyn said evenly. "But I'll tell you anyway, because you've got a right to know who's sleeping under your roof." She set Clara down in the small wooden cradle near the stove and straightened up. "I had a husband, had a house, had a life that looked a certain way from the outside." She picked up a plate and started stacking. 3 years ago it stopped looking that way, so I left. Caleb was quiet for a moment. "He hurt you, in the ways that don't leave marks." She said it without self-pity, just a fact stated flat. "I stayed too long trying to make it work, and when I finally left, I had nothing but a bag and the road. That's the whole story." Sadie had gone very still at the far end of the table. She was pretending not to listen. She was absolutely listening. "I'm not running from the law," Evelyn added. "I'm not running from debt. I'm just a woman who took a bad road for a while and ended up walking past your gate this morning." Caleb looked up from his coffee cup and looked at her directly. "And you're not going to disappear in the night with the silver." "You'd have to have silver for that," Evelyn said. Something crossed his face that might have been a laugh if it had traveled a little further. "Fair point." Tommy pushed his chair back and stood up. "I'll do the dishes," he said. He said it to the room, not to anyone specifically, and he started stacking plates with the methodical efficiency of someone who'd been doing it for longer than he should have. "I'll do them," Evelyn said. "I got it." Tommy didn't look at her. His jaw was set. Evelyn looked at him for a moment, then she stepped aside. "All right." She understood. This was his kitchen too, his family. She was a stranger, and she hadn't earned the right to take things from him yet, even chores he probably hated. She filed that away. The next morning she was up before the sun. She had the fire going and the coffee on and biscuits in the pan by the time Caleb came downstairs, and she had already fed Clara, who was sitting in the cradle making small satisfied sounds at the ceiling. Caleb stopped in the kitchen doorway. Again. "You don't have to do all this," he said. "I know I don't," Evelyn said. "Biscuits'll be done in 15 minutes. He sat down. He wrapped both hands around the coffee cup she set in front of him. He said very quietly, "She slept through the night." Evelyn looked at him. "Clara," he said. "She hasn't done that in—" He stopped. His jaw worked. "Since before Ruth died, I think. Before the sickness got bad." He didn't look up from the cup. "I didn't know if I was going to make it through another night of that." Evelyn said nothing. She turned back to the stove and checked the biscuits. "I don't say that to make you feel like you owe me something," she said after a moment. "I say it because you should know she just needed the right food at the right time. She's a healthy baby. She's going to be fine." "Yeah." His voice was rough. "Yeah, I think she might be." The days began to take on a shape. Evelyn learned the rhythms of Hollow Creek, the way she'd learned every hard thing in her life by paying close attention and asking questions when she needed to, and staying quiet when she didn't. She learned that Tommy took his responsibilities as the eldest son with a seriousness that sometimes tipped over into rigidity, that Robert had no fear of anything, and had to be watched near the horses, that Lily spoke mostly in questions, and followed Evelyn around the kitchen like a small, solemn shadow. She learned that Sadie ran a constant temperature check on everyone in the house, feeling for danger, the way a person who'd been hurt before felt for it with her whole body all the time. She learned that Caleb Hayes was a man of very few unnecessary words, but that he noticed everything. He noticed when she rehung the kitchen door that had been scraping the floor. He noticed when she resorted the pantry so the things they used daily were at the front. He noticed when she started keeping a small bowl of warm water by the cradle at night, so she could mix Clara's oatmeal quickly without having to light the stove in the dark. He never said anything about any of it. But she knew he noticed. On the fourth day, Sadie cracked. Not all the way. Not in any way she would admit to. But Evelyn was teaching Lily how to roll pie dough. The girl had asked, curious about the rolling pin. Curious about everything. And Sadie came in from the yard, stopped in the kitchen doorway, watched for a moment, and said very casually, "You're holding the pin wrong. You need to push out from the center." Evelyn looked at her. "Show me." Sadie came to the table. She took the rolling pin with the practiced ease of a girl who had watched her mother do this many times, and Evelyn showed her, taught her, explaining it patiently, while Lily watched with enormous eyes. And when she was done, she stepped back, and her face closed up again, as if she'd handed over something by accident and wasn't sure she wanted to. "Your mama taught you that," Evelyn said. "Yeah, short, guarded. She taught you well." Sadie looked at her for a long moment. Then she picked up a dish towel and said, "The beans'll burn if you don't stir them," and walked out. But the next morning she was in the kitchen when Evelyn came downstairs. Not helping exactly, just there, sitting at the table with a mending basket repairing one of Robert's shirts in a room that suddenly had 2 people in it instead of 1. Evelyn said nothing about it. She just started the coffee. Tommy was harder. He was polite. Hayes, polite, which was a specific thing, measured and correct, and giving nothing away. He did whatever was asked of him. He was never rude. But he also never forgot that Evelyn was a stranger, and there were moments when she caught him watching her with those gray-green eyes, his father's eyes with something in them that wasn't hostility, so much as grief. And she understood then what he was really watching for. He was watching to see if she would leave. He had already lost his mother. He was not going to let himself need anyone else until he was sure they were going to stay. On the 6th day, she found him in the barn. She hadn't been looking for him. She'd come to check on one of the mares that had been favoring her left foreleg. Tommy was already there, sitting on an overturned bucket, talking to the horse in a low, steady voice while he ran his hand down the mare's leg. He heard Evelyn come in, and he stopped talking. He didn't look up. "She's been like this 2 days, he said. His voice was flat, informational. "Pa knows. He said to keep an eye on it." Evelyn came to stand beside him and crouched down, running her fingers the same way he had feeling for heat. "It's not bad," she said. "Not yet. You need to keep it wrapped and keep her from the paddock for another few days." Tommy looked at her then. "You know horses?" "I know enough." She straightened. "My grandfather kept horses. He taught me what he knew." Tommy was quiet. He looked back at the mare. "Pa said you were from Kansas." "That's right. Long way from Wyoming." "It is." He rubbed the mare's nose once, deliberate and gentle. "My mama was from Colorado. She said Wyoming was the loneliest state in the country when she first came here." A pause. "She said she got used to it." Evelyn waited. "She said it was actually beautiful once you stopped being scared of how big it was." Tommy's voice was careful. He was handing her something he wasn't sure he wanted to hand her. "I don't know if I believe that yet." "Takes time," Evelyn said. "Most things that are worth believing take time." He looked at her. 9 years old and carrying the weight of a man twice his age. "Are you going to stay?" he asked. Direct, no softening. The question his brother had asked in his child's way, but Tommy asking it meant something different. Evelyn didn't look away from him. That's up to your father, she said, and up to whether this family needs me here. We need you here, Tommy said. He said it simply, without drama, in the same flat, informational tone he'd started with. Then he stood up, picked up the bucket, and walked out of the barn without looking back, leaving Evelyn standing next to the mare in the quiet. She pressed her forehead gently against the horse's warm neck and closed her eyes for just a moment. She had not allowed herself to need anything in a very long time. She had kept herself moving because moving meant you weren't depending on anything staying put. And now, here was this boy, 9 years old, telling her flat and plain that they needed her, and she felt something give way inside her chest. Not painfully, but with the particular ache of a thing that had been held tight for too long, beginning very slowly to release. That evening, Wade Hayes arrived. She heard the horse before she saw the man, heard it come up the road at a lope, heard it pull up in the yard, heard boots hit the porch steps. The door opened, and he came in without knocking. The way a man comes into a house, he's been coming into his whole life. And then he saw Evelyn standing at the stove, and he stopped dead. He was older than Caleb by a few years, broader through the middle, with the same dark coloring, but a more open face, the kind of face that showed what it was thinking, without necessarily intending to. Right now, it was showing surprise, suspicion, and something else she couldn't quite read. Caleb, he said, not looking away from Evelyn. Caleb came in from the hallway. Wade, you made good time. Who's this? Evelyn Carter. She's been helping with the house and the children. Wade looked at her for a long, frank moment. Then he looked at his brother. When did this happen? 6 days ago. 6 days. Wade pulled off his hat. He looked back at Evelyn. Where'd you come from, Miss Carter? The road, Evelyn said. The road, he repeated. He said it the way a man says something that sounds simple but lands complicated. She was passing, Caleb said. His voice had an edge to it now, faint but present. She heard Clara. Wade was quiet for a moment. He put his hat on the hook by the door, an automatic gesture, the movement of long habit, and he said, Clara sleeping through the night now. Yes, Caleb said. Kitchen looks like it got sorted out. It did? Children eating right? They are. Wade looked at Evelyn one more time. Whatever calculation he was running, he ran it fast. You want to stay on? He asked. That's between me and Mr. Hayes, Evelyn said. Something in Wade's expression shifted, not quite approval, but the precursor to it. He pulled out a chair and sat down at the table. Well, he said, I reckon Caleb ought to figure that out sooner rather than later, because I can tell you right now those children look better than they have in 6 months, and the house smells like real food, so. Wade, Caleb said, I'm just saying what I see. Caleb stood in the doorway between the hall and the kitchen, and he looked at Evelyn. Really looked at her the way he hadn't quite let himself in the days before taking her in directly, without the sideways glance he'd been using, and Evelyn held his gaze and didn't flinch and didn't look away, because she had nothing to hide, and she was done being ashamed of needing a place to land. You can stay, Caleb said. Long as you want, long as you're willing. The kitchen was very quiet. All right, Evelyn said. She turned back to the stove. Supper's in 20 minutes. Robert, who had been sitting under the table this entire time in a fashion that apparently no adult had noticed, said yes, and smacked the underside of the table with both hands. Wade startled so hard he nearly came out of his chair. Robert James Hayes, Caleb said in a voice that could have peeled paint. Robert crawled out from under the table with the expression of a boy who had absolutely no regrets. He looked at Evelyn. I knew you were going to stay, he announced. Did you? Evelyn said. Yeah. He climbed into his chair. Sadie said you would. She said you had the look of somebody who was done running. Evelyn stilled. Across the kitchen, she heard Wade let out a low sound that was definitely a laugh he was working hard to swallow. She heard Caleb make a sound that was not quite anything, but was also maybe the echo of one. She didn't look at either of them. She stirred the pot on the stove slow and even, and she thought about an 11-year-old girl with her father's eyes sitting at a kitchen table with a mending basket and saying nothing, watching everything arriving at the truth before any of the adults in the room had managed to. Sadie had the look of somebody who was done running. Maybe she did. The food was ready at 6. All of them sat down together, Caleb at the head weight across from Sadie Robert, next to Lily Tommy at the far end, where he'd been sitting since he was old enough to hold a fork. Evelyn put Clara in the cradle and took the chair nearest the stove, the way a woman takes the chair that's close enough to get up quickly if something needs tending. Nobody said anything about it being her chair. By the time the biscuits were gone, and the stew was down to the last of it, the table had gotten louder. Robert had gotten Wade into a detailed account of a gopher he'd found in the south field, and Lily was drawing on the edge of a flour sack with a piece of charcoal. She absolutely should not have had, and even Tommy had started talking low and direct to Caleb about the mare's leg. Evelyn sat in her chair and watched all of it and felt the warmth of the stove at her back and the weight of Clara sleeping 3 feet away and the particular fragile quiet of a house that was trying very hard to be alive again. She didn't know yet what this was going to cost her. She had learned enough about life to know that things that felt this solid were usually the things that could hurt you the worst when they broke. But she was tired of running. She had told the boy that morning that believing took time. Maybe it was time she started taking her own advice. Outside, the Wyoming summer pressed against the windows, golden and vast, full of everything still ahead. The trouble arrived on a Tuesday, the way trouble usually does, quietly dressed up like something ordinary. Evelyn was in the kitchen making preserves when she heard the wagon come up the road. She heard it stop at the gate. She heard boots on the porch steps, 2 sets, not one, and then a knock that was too loud and too deliberate to be a neighbor stopping by friendly. Caleb was in from the south field in under 3 minutes. He came through the kitchen without looking at her, wiped his hands on his pants, and opened the front door. The man on the porch was dressed too well for a ranch visit. Dark coat, clean boots, a hat that had never seen hard weather. He had a smooth, careful face, and the kind of smile that showed teeth without reaching anywhere near the eyes. The man behind him was larger, quieter, and had the look of someone paid to stand in doorways and make people uncomfortable. "Mr. Hayes," the well-dressed man said. "Gerald Marsh. I represent the Consolidated Territorial Bank out of Cheyenne." Evelyn didn't move from the stove, but she stopped stirring. "I know who you are," Caleb said. His voice had gone flat and very still. "What do you want, Marsh?" "Just a conversation." Marsh smiled again, a friendly one. "May I come in?" "You may not." Caleb stepped out onto the porch and pulled the door most of the way shut behind him. "Say what you came to say." Evelyn set down the spoon. She moved to the window not to spy, but because she needed to hear, and she needed to hear because whatever was happening on that porch had been coming for a while, and she could feel it in the way Caleb's shoulders had changed the moment he saw who was there. Sadie appeared in the kitchen doorway. She'd heard it too. Her face was white. "Stay here," Evelyn said quietly. Sadie didn't argue. That alone told Evelyn how serious it was. Through the window she caught pieces of it. Marsh's voice was smooth and unhurried, the voice of a man who held all the cards and knew it. She heard "outstanding balance," and "note coming due," and "end of August," and "the bank has been patient, Mr. Hayes, but patience has its limits." She heard Caleb's voice low, controlled the particular control of a man keeping himself from saying what he actually wanted to say. She heard, "I'll have it," and "I need more time." And Marsh's response, which was not unkind in tone and was absolutely merciless in content. "The bank isn't in the business of extensions, Mr. Hayes, especially not for properties with outstanding liens and no clear path to resolution." A pause. "Now, there is another option. We have a buyer interested in the Hollow Creek acreage. Serious buyer. Fair offer. It would clear the note, leave you with something in hand, and allow you to start fresh somewhere less demanding." She couldn't hear what Caleb said to that. She heard the tone of it. Marsh left 5 minutes later. He tipped his hat at the porch railing, as if the railing had done something to deserve the courtesy. The large, quiet man followed him back to the wagon without ever having said a word. Caleb came back inside. He walked past the kitchen without stopping, went into the hallway, and she heard the door to his office, the small room off the entry where he kept the ranch ledgers, close behind him. Sadie looked at Evelyn. "How bad is it?" "I don't know yet, but it's bad." Evelyn picked up the spoon. "Set the table for supper, Sadie." "That's not an answer." "No," Evelyn said. "It's not. Set the table anyway." She let him have an hour. She brought a plate of food to the office door, knocked twice, and left it on the floor outside when he didn't answer. When she checked 30 minutes later, the plate was gone. It was Wade who told her the whole of it 2 days later, when he rode in from his spread, with a look on his face that said he already knew. He sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee he wasn't drinking, and told her about the loan Caleb had taken out the year before Ruth got sick. A big loan to expand the herd, to build the new barn section, to make the ranch into the thing Ruth had always believed it could be. And then Ruth got sick, and the herd expansion got delayed, and the medical bills came, and then Ruth died, and the cost of that, not just in money, but in everything, had put Hollow Creek so far behind that catching up looked less like a mountain to climb and more like a cliff to fall off. "End of August," Wade said. "That's when the note comes due, full amount plus interest." He turned the cup in his hands. "He doesn't have it." "How short is he?" Wade told her the number. She didn't let her face change, but inside, something went cold and specific. "And the buyer Marsh mentioned, Frank Leland." Wade's jaw tightened. "Owns half the county already. He's been after this land for 3 years. Ruth wouldn't sell. Caleb won't sell." He paused. "He might not have a choice." "There's always a choice," Evelyn said. Wade looked at her. "You sound sure about that." "I've been in tight spots before." She stood up, started moving because she thought better on her feet. "The cattle. What's the current count?" 65 head. The 2 hands manage them." "What's the market price running in Cheyenne right now?" Wade blinked. "How do you know about cattle prices?" "Kansas," she said simply. "What's the price?" he told her. She did the math in her head the way her grandfather had taught her, fast and without mercy. The numbers didn't work, not by a long way, not through August. "What about the south pasture?" she asked. "The one that's not currently in use." "It's sitting." "Could it run more cattle?" "Probably, if someone had the time to fix the fencing." She looked at him. He looked at her. She watched the idea land in his face, watched him take it apart and put it back together. "That's a lot of work," he said. "It is," Evelyn agreed. "And it might not be enough." "No," Wade said. "It might not." They sat with that for a moment. Then Wade said, "Caleb's not going to like you getting involved in the business end." "Probably not." Evelyn picked up his untouched coffee cup and put it in the wash basin. "But he's going to have to make peace with it." She chose her moment carefully. She waited until after supper, until the children were in bed, until Caleb was sitting on the porch in the dark with what was left of a cup of coffee going cold in his hand. She pulled the second chair over and sat down without asking if she could. He didn't tell her to go inside. She let the quiet go on for a while because some silences needed to run their course. "I talked to Wade," she said finally. Caleb's jaw moved. "He shouldn't have told you." "You're right. He probably shouldn't have." She kept her voice even. "But he did, and I know, and I'm not going to pretend I don't." He was quiet for a moment. "It's not your problem, Evelyn." "You made it my problem when you let me stay," she said. "Not unkind, just plain. This family's my problem now. That's how it works." Caleb set down the cup. He rested his elbows on his knees and he stared out at the dark yard, and she could see the shape of him carrying it, all of it, the debt and the grief and the children and the ranch and the terrible arithmetic of a life that kept demanding more than he had. "Ruth believed in this place," he said. "It came out rough. She picked it. She said the bones were right. She said, He stopped, pressed his lips together, started again. She said it just needed time to become what it was supposed to be. She wasn't wrong, Evelyn said. Hard to see that right now. I know it is. She looked at the side of his face. The south pasture. If you could get the fencing repaired, run another 30 head through the summer. I don't have the hands for it. My 2 men are already stretched. Wade could help. I can help. Tommy's strong enough to work fence line, and you know it. Caleb turned and looked at her. You've been thinking about this. All day. It might not be enough. It might not be, she agreed. But it's something. And something is better than sitting on this porch watching August come. He held her gaze for a long moment. In the dark, his eyes were unreadable, but his face was not. She could see him working through it. The resistance and the pride, and underneath both of those, the desperate, exhausted willingness of a man who had been fighting alone for too long and was being offered a hand by someone who wasn't asking for anything in return. Evelyn, he said, and her name in his mouth sounded different than it had in the beginning, less like the name of a stranger, and more like the name of someone he was trying to figure out. Don't thank me yet, she said. We haven't fixed anything yet. The corner of his mouth moved. Just barely. They started on the fence the next morning. Tommy was up before anyone had to ask him. He was already in the barn sorting wire and posts when Evelyn came out at first light, and he looked at her with those serious eyes and said, Wade's coming at 7, like she'd already told him the plan, which she hadn't. How do you know that? Heard you and Pa on the porch last night. He picked up a post. I'm not a child. No, Evelyn said. You're not. Is it bad, the money? She looked at him straight. He was 9 years old. He was also Tommy Hayes, which meant something. It's serious, she said. We're going to work on fixing it. He nodded once. Okay. He picked up a second post. Let's go then. They worked 3 days on the south fence, sunup to sundown. Evelyn and Wade and Tommy and Caleb, spelling each other through the heat, and Sadie bringing water out at intervals with an efficiency that said she'd decided the best way she could help was to keep everyone from collapsing. Robert followed behind them, doing the small tasks he was big enough for, collecting dropped tools, holding wire when asked, talking constantly to anyone who would listen, and sometimes to people who wouldn't. On the second day of fence work, Evelyn looked up and saw Clara in the yard. Clara, who was 7 months old and had never pulled herself upright before. Clara, who was gripping the bottom rail of the paddock fence with both fists and standing wobbling, furious, determined on 2 small feet, her face scrunched with the effort of it. Evelyn walked over to her and crouched down and said, Well, look at you. Clara looked at her with the expression of someone who had just discovered they were capable of something enormous and wanted acknowledgement for it. She's standing, Robert announced at full volume to the entire ranch. Caleb turned from the fence line. Something moved in his face, something that cracked open quick and bright and then settled into something deeper, something that was grief and love in equal measure, because Clara standing meant time, moving meant his baby turning into a person, meant Ruth would never see it. He walked across the yard and crouched down beside Evelyn, and he put one big hand on Clara's back, steadying her, and Clara grabbed his finger with both of her hands and laughed that absolute full-body baby laugh that has no self-consciousness in it at all. Caleb made a sound, low, rough, not quite words. He pressed his other hand to his eyes for just a moment. Evelyn stayed exactly where she was and said nothing and let him have it. She's gonna walk by the end of summer, Robert said with enormous confidence. I bet she walks before August. Could be, Evelyn said. Caleb lowered his hand. His eyes were red at the corners. He looked at Evelyn and she met his gaze, and she saw for the first time something that had nothing to do with exhaustion or calculation or grief, something simpler and more difficult than any of those things. Thank you, he said, very quiet. I already told you not to thank me, she said. I'm thanking you anyway. Clara laughed again and lunged forward and would have gone face first into the dirt if both of them hadn't caught her at the same time. Caleb's hand and Evelyn's hand meeting around the baby's middle, simultaneously, their fingers overlapping for just a second before they both adjusted their grip and sorted out who had her. Neither of them said anything about it, but Sadie, watching from the water bucket 12 feet away, saw it. And the look on her face was not the guarded, watchful expression she'd been wearing for 3 weeks. It was something else entirely, something that looked for just a moment like a child who was beginning to let herself hope. The storm came that night without warning. No, that wasn't quite right. The warning was there. The sky that afternoon had that particular green-yellow color at the edges that old ranchers read like a letter, and the cattle had been restless since noon, moving in the way animals moved when they knew something was coming. But nobody had expected it to turn as fast as it did or to hit as hard. The hail started around 10 o'clock at night. Evelyn heard it on the roof first, a sound like gravel thrown against tin, then something larger, more insistent, and then a roar that woke everyone in the house at once. She was already up and in the hallway by the time the children's doors started opening, Clara's cry rising under the sound of the storm. "Stay inside," Caleb said, coming down the stairs, fast boots in hand. "All of you." "The cattle," Tommy said. "I know, I'm going." Caleb was already at the door. "I'm coming with you," Tommy said. "No. Pa, no." Caleb's voice was a door closing. "Tommy, I need you in here. I need you to be the one in here. Can you do that for me?" Tommy stopped. His fists were tight at his sides. 9 years old, and every inch of him wanting to go out into that storm, because going out meant doing something, and he was a boy who needed to be doing something, or the fear ate him. But he looked at his father, and he swallowed it down and said, "Yes, sir." Caleb went out into the hail. Evelyn got Clara and brought her to the main room. Lily was crying, not loud, but steady, the quiet, desperate crying of a child who was trying to be brave and didn't quite have enough brave left. Evelyn sat on the floor with Clara in her lap and held her free arm out, and Lily came into it without hesitating, pressed her face against Evelyn's side. "It's loud," Lily said. "It is," Evelyn agreed. "It's very loud. That means it's passing through. Loud storms move fast." "Is that true?" Sadie asked. She was standing in the doorway with her arms crossed, holding herself together. "Mostly," Evelyn said honestly. Clara chose that moment to spike a fever. Evelyn noticed it when she shifted the baby in her lap, felt the heat coming off her little body like an oven, sudden and wrong. She put her wrist to Clara's forehead, then her lips. Then she looked at Tommy. "Get me the cold water from the pitcher in the kitchen," she said. "And a cloth." Tommy was already moving. Sadie came off the doorframe and crossed the room and crouched down. "What's wrong with her?" "Fever. It came on fast." Evelyn was already unwrapping Clara's blanket, cooling the air around her. "This happens with babies sometimes. The excitement, the noise. We need to bring it down." "Is she going to be all right?" Sadie's voice cracked on the last word. Just barely. "Yes." Evelyn said it with a certainty she was mostly sure of. "But I need everyone to stay calm and do exactly what I say." Tommy came back with the water and cloth. Evelyn soaked the cloth and pressed it to the back of Clara's neck, then her wrists, then her feet. The baby fussed and wriggled and screamed, and the hail roared on the roof, and outside somewhere, a piece of the barn came loose with a sound like a gunshot. Lily screamed and grabbed Evelyn's arm. "It's the barn," Tommy said at the window. His voice was steady. Evelyn had no idea how it was steady. "Part of the lean-to section. It's not the main structure." "Can you see Pa?" Sadie asked. "Not yet." The hail went on for 40 minutes. It felt like longer. Evelyn stayed on the floor the entire time, with Clara cooling in her arms and Lily tucked against her side, and Sadie eventually sitting beside her, not because Sadie decided to, but because at some point her legs just brought her there, and she didn't argue with them. The fever broke at midnight. Clara stopped fighting and went limp and damp and peaceful in Evelyn's arms. Her temperature dropping back to something that felt like a sleeping baby, instead of something that needed a doctor's hands. Evelyn exhaled. "She's okay?" Tommy asked. He'd stayed at the window the entire time watching for his father. "She's okay," Evelyn said. He turned back to the window. Then, in a voice so controlled it must have cost him everything he had, he said, "Pa's coming back." Sadie made a sound. Robert, who had been wedged behind the settle the whole time, in a silence so unlike himself that it had been terrifying, scrambled out and got to the door before Caleb's boots hit the porch. Caleb came in looking like the storm had personally decided to focus on him. He was soaked through, cut across the forearm from something hail or wire Evelyn couldn't tell, and there was blood on his shirt. He looked at his children first, counting them the way parents count after a close call. Then he looked at Evelyn, at Clara sleeping in her arms. "She's all right," he asked. "She's all right." Evelyn looked at his arm. "You're not. It's nothing. It's not nothing." She was already standing, shifting Clara to Sadie, who took the baby with the automatic competence of a girl who had been helping with her sister for months. "Sit down, Mr. Hayes. Tommy, get me the medicine box from the pantry shelf. I can take care of my own." "Sit down," Evelyn said. He sat down. Wade came through this door 20 minutes after that, soaked to the bone and wild-eyed, having ridden 8 miles through the tail end of the storm, when he saw the clouds moving toward Hollow Creek from his porch. He took in the room, Caleb with a bandage on his arm, the children arranged around Evelyn like satellites finding their orbit, Clara sleeping against Sadie's shoulder, and Evelyn herself on her knees on the kitchen floor, with blood on her hands that was Caleb's, and a look on her face that was not fear and not relief, but the particular calm of a person who had been through worse. Wade stood in the doorway for a long moment. The rain still coming down outside. The house quiet in the way houses got quiet after something that could have been terrible and wasn't. "Well," he said finally to no one in particular, "I reckon she stays then." Nobody argued with him, not even Tommy. The morning after the storm, Hollow Creek looked like something that had been picked up and put back down slightly wrong. The lean-to section of the barn was gone. Not damaged, gone, the boards scattered across the south field like the structure had simply decided to become something else. 2 fence sections in the north paddock had gone down. The kitchen garden, which Evelyn had been quietly rescuing from weeks of neglect, had taken a beating from the hail. And the roof over the small room where she slept had developed a leak that had soaked through her traveling bag and everything in it. She discovered the last part when she went back to her room at 5 in the morning after getting Clara settled. She stood in the doorway, looking at the puddle on the floor and the wet bag and the damp cot, and felt for just a moment the old familiar pull. The one that said this was a sign that things coming apart was the universe's way of telling you to move on before you got any more tangled up in something that wasn't yours. She told that voice to be quiet. Then she picked up her bag, wrung out what she could, and went back to the kitchen to start the coffee. Caleb found her there an hour later. He looked at the coffee, then at her, then at the fact that her traveling bag was hanging over the back of a chair, dripping onto his kitchen floor. "Your room," he said. "Roof's got a hole in it." She handed him a cup. "It's fine." "It's not fine. You can't sleep in there until it's repaired." "I've slept in worse." "Not on my ranch you haven't." He set the cup down. He looked at her with an expression she was starting to read, the one that meant he'd already decided something and was now figuring out how to say it without it sounding like more than he meant. "There's a room upstairs, at the end of the hall. We've been using it for storage, but it's got a proper roof and a proper floor, and it's a real room." He paused. "It'd be closer to the children." Evelyn looked at him. "Clara wakes at night," he said. "It'd be easier, for you." "For me," she said. "That's what I said." She looked at him a moment longer. "All right," she said. "Thank you." He picked his coffee back up. "Don't thank me. The storage will just have to go somewhere else." By mid-morning, half the county had apparently heard about the storm and decided to arrive at Hollow Creek to assess the damage and offer opinions about it. Margaret Alcott came first in her wagon with 2 of her grown daughters and a basket of food that was both generous and slightly pointed in the way that Margaret Alcott's generosity always was. She was a large woman with sharp eyes and the bearing of someone who had appointed herself the social conscience of the territory, and she came through the front door with the energy of a woman arriving at a situation that required her management. She stopped when she saw Evelyn. "Who's this?" she asked Caleb. She didn't ask Evelyn. "Evelyn Carter," Caleb said. "She's been helping with the house and the children." Margaret looked Evelyn up and down with the frank assessment of a woman who had no patience for pretense. Evelyn held still and let her look because she'd been looked at by harder women than Margaret Alcott, and she knew the drill. You didn't flinch, and you didn't explain yourself, and you let people arrive at their own conclusions, because the ones who were going to be decent to you eventually would get there on their own, and the ones who weren't going to be moved by anything you said anyway. "Where are you from?" Margaret asked. "Kansas," Evelyn said. "You got family here?" "No, ma'am." "Husband?" "No, ma'am." Margaret's eyes moved to Caleb, then back to Evelyn, and she performed the particular arithmetic that small communities perform when an unmarried woman shows up in a widower's house, and her expression went through several adjustments before settling on something that was cautious, but not unkind. "The children look well," Margaret said finally. It was as close to approval as she appeared to get on short acquaintance. "They're good children," Evelyn said. "Sadie used to look like she was carrying the world on her shoulders." Margaret tilted her head. "She looks lighter this week." "She's been a tremendous help," Evelyn said, and meant it. Something shifted in Margaret's face. She put her basket on the kitchen table and said, "Well, let's see what needs doing." And from that point forward, behaved as if Evelyn had always been there and was entirely unobjectionable, which Evelyn suspected was the best she was going to get, and was grateful for it. The men from the neighboring ranches came to help with the barn. It happened without being organized. One arrived then, 2 more, then 4. The way communities moved toward disaster when they were functioning the way communities were supposed to. Caleb directed and worked alongside them, and Wade was there by mid-morning. And by afternoon, the lean-to frame was roughed back in, and the fence sections were up, and the worst of it was manageable. Tommy worked all day without stopping. He worked next to the men, not behind them, and nobody told him to go sit with the younger children, because they could all see he was doing the work of someone considerably older than 9. By the end of the afternoon, he had earned 3 separate nods of approval from ranchers who did not hand out approval easily, and he walked back to the house with his shoulders a fraction of an inch higher than they'd been that morning. Evelyn noticed. She didn't say anything about it, but she noticed. It was during the cleanup late afternoon that Hattie Pruitt arrived. Hattie was the kind of woman who made her presence known before she was fully through the door. Bright voice, decisive movements, the energy of someone who had a great deal to say, and had never once questioned whether it needed to be said. She came into the kitchen where Evelyn was managing the feeding of approximately 14 people, and stopped and looked around and announced, "Well, I heard there was a woman managing this house now, and I had to come see for myself." Evelyn set down the ladle. "Evelyn Carter." "Hattie Pruitt. My husband George is out there with the lumber." Hattie looked at the stove, the organized chaos of the kitchen, the pot of stew that had somehow expanded to feed twice as many people as it was originally intended for. "How long have you been here?" 3 weeks. 3 weeks? Hattie repeated it with the emphasis of someone finding a number more interesting than expected. "And Caleb Hayes let a stranger stay on his ranch for 3 weeks. He did. He didn't let the last 3 women who offered to help so much as through the gate." Hattie looked at her with frank curiosity. "What'd you do that was different?" "I didn't offer," Evelyn said. "I just started cooking." Hattie laughed, a real one, sudden and full. "Lord," she said, "I like you." She picked up a dish towel without being asked. "What do you need me to do?" That was how Evelyn acquired without intending to something like an ally. The twist came the following week, dressed up as paperwork. Caleb brought it to the kitchen table on a Thursday evening after the children were in bed, a folded document that he set down without speaking, and sat back and looked at like a man looking at something he couldn't decide whether to be angry about or just tired. Evelyn sat down across from him. "What is it?" "Deed challenge." His voice was flat. "Leland's lawyers are saying there's a dispute about the boundary line on the east side of the property. 40 acres in question." He pressed his hand flat on the table beside the document. "Those 40 acres include the creek access. Without the creek, The south pasture isn't viable." Evelyn went very still. "That's the pasture we just fixed the fencing on." "Yes, the one that's supposed to carry the additional cattle that's supposed to help cover the banknote." "Yes." She looked at him. "Is there an actual dispute? Or is this Leland using his lawyers the way he uses everything as a tool to pressure you?" Caleb's jaw tightened. The original survey from 1871 has some ambiguity in the language. It's enough for them to file on. He looked up. "My father filed that deed. He told me he always told me that land went to the creek. He walked it himself. He said the creek was ours." "Do you have anything in writing beyond the deed?" "There might be something in my father's papers. I haven't looked through all of them." He said it with the expression of a man who hadn't opened that box because opening it meant sitting with his father's handwriting, and his father was gone too, and there was only so much a person could hold at once. Evelyn put her hand on the table, not on his hand, just on the table close enough to mean something. "Then we look," she said. "Tonight, if you're willing. We go through whatever your father left and we find what there is to find." He looked at her. "It might be nothing." "It might be. But we look first and find out second." She stood up. "Where are his papers?" "Evelyn." "Where are they, Caleb?" Something in his face broke open slightly at the sound of his name in her voice. Not his last name. Not a courtesy. Just his name, said plainly. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The chest in the upstairs hall. The one with the brass latch." They found it at midnight. It was a letter handwritten dated 1873 from Caleb's father, Elias Hayes, to the county land office describing in specific and careful terms the eastern boundary of Hollow Creek Ranch as running to and including the western bank of Hollow Creek, with attached witness signatures from two neighboring ranchers, both of whom Evelyn recognized as the fathers of men currently living in the county. She read it twice to be sure she'd understood it. Then she held it out to Caleb. He read it. He read it again. He set it down on the floor of the hallway where they'd been sitting with the chest between them and the lamp turned up high, and he pressed both hands to his face and didn't say anything for a long time. "It's enough," Evelyn said quietly. "It's not the deed, but it's documentation of intent and witness. Any honest judge would call that definitive. Leland will make sure the judge isn't honest. Maybe?" She looked at him directly. "But you can't hide that letter and hope the problem goes away. You have to fight it." "I know how to fight, Evelyn." "I know you do." She didn't back down from his tone. "I'm just saying, fight this one." He lowered his hands. His eyes were red-rimmed with exhaustion, and something else, the grief of finding his father's handwriting at midnight in a hallway in a house that was trying to be taken from him. Ruth would have said the same thing. Evelyn said nothing. She never backed down from a thing in her life. He picked the letter back up, held it carefully the way you held something irreplaceable. "I keep wondering what she would have made of all this. The bank, Leland, all of it." He paused. "You." Evelyn met his eyes. "She would have liked you," he said. Simple. No calculation in it. She didn't have patience for women who made themselves small to make other people comfortable. She would have liked that you don't do that. Evelyn felt something move through her chest, warm and complicated, and more than a little frightening. "She sounds like she was something," she said. "She was everything," Caleb said. And then, because he was an honest man, and honest men said the whole truth. And I'm starting to think that life has room for more than one everything. I don't know what to do with that yet. The hallway was very quiet. "You don't have to do anything with it yet," Evelyn said. He nodded. Once. He looked at the letter in his hands. "I'll ride to Laramie on Monday. There's a lawyer there, Henderson Wade trusts him. I'll take this. I'll have the children sorted before you go." "You don't have to." "Caleb." She said it the same way she'd said it before, just his name, just plain. "I'll have the children sorted." He looked at her for a long moment. Then, "All right." They put the papers away carefully and went back downstairs, and the house settled around them the way houses settled at midnight when everything in them was asleep. The next morning, Sadie was already in the kitchen when Evelyn came down, which had become a usual thing by now. What was not usual was the expression on her face, the particular expression of a girl who had been awake thinking and had arrived somewhere she needed to say out loud. "I heard you and Pa last night," Sadie said. "Not everything, but enough." Evelyn poured coffee, waited. "Are we going to lose the ranch?" "Your father is going to Laramie on Monday to fight for it." "But we might lose it." Evelyn turned and looked at her. 11 years old and wanting the truth, not a comfortable version of it. "We might," she said. "I'm not going to lie to you about that." Sadie absorbed this with the particular steadiness she brought to everything hard. Then she said, "If we lose it, where do we go?" "I don't know yet." "Would you come with us?" The question landed like a stone in still water. Evelyn held Sadie's gaze, and she thought about 43 cents and a road and a baby crying in a house that wasn't hers, and every bad decision that had led her here, and every inexplicable right thing that had happened since. "Yes," she said. "I would come with you." Sadie nodded. She pulled out her chair and sat down and picked up the mending basket that was more or less permanent on the kitchen table now, and she said, "Then we'd better make sure we don't lose it," with the flat practicality of her father, and picked up a shirt to mend. Robert came downstairs 10 minutes later, assessed the mood in the kitchen, declared that he was hungry and that something smelled good, and demanded to know if there were biscuits, and the morning began, the way mornings at Hollow Creek had begun to begin, loud and layered, and full of the small, impossible, ordinary life of a family that was still against considerable odds standing. Caleb came down last. He looked at the kitchen, at Sadie mending at Evelyn, at the stove at Robert, attempting to convince Lily that a spider in a jar was actually a good breakfast companion, and something in his face did the thing it had been doing more often lately, the thing that wasn't quite a smile, but was in the same family as one. He sat down. He picked up his coffee. He looked at Evelyn across the table. "I was thinking," he said. "Careful habit," she said. The corner of his mouth moved. "The room upstairs, the one you're in now. What about it?" "It's a good room," he said. "Better than the one off the kitchen. Better roof." "It is," she agreed, watching him. "I just think—" He stopped, looked at his cup, looked back at her. "I think it should stay your room. Not just until the other one's fixed. Just yours." Evelyn held his gaze. Robert had stopped arguing with Lily and was now watching them both with the unself-conscious attention of a 6-year-old who had no idea he was witnessing something. "All right," Evelyn said. "All right," Caleb repeated. "Pa's giving Miss Evelyn a room," Robert announced to the table at large. "She already had a room," Sadie said without looking up from her mending. "A better room," Robert said. "Robert," Caleb said. "I'm just saying what happened." Robert looked at Evelyn. "Does this mean you're staying for a real long time now?" Evelyn looked at Caleb. Caleb looked at Evelyn. Something passed between them, unspoken, unresolved, honest, in the way that only things left unnamed could be honest. "Ask me at the end of summer," Evelyn said to Robert. Robert considered this. "Okay," he said, "but I'm going to ask you every day until then." "Robert?" Caleb and Sadie said simultaneously. Robert grinned the gap-toothed grin of a boy who had absolutely no intention of doing anything differently, and reached for the biscuits, and the kitchen filled up with the noise of morning. And outside, the Wyoming summer stretched on hot and wide and full of things not yet decided, not yet lost, not yet won, hanging in the balance of what people chose to do when they had every reason to give up and chose stubbornly and imperfectly not to. Caleb rode to Laramie on Monday and came back on Wednesday with Henderson the lawyer and a look on his face that Evelyn couldn't read from the porch, which frightened her more than if he'd looked openly defeated. Henderson was a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and the unhurried manner of someone who had learned that urgency rarely improved legal situations. He sat at the kitchen table with the letter from Elias Hayes and the original deed and several other documents Caleb had brought from the chest, and he read everything twice without speaking. The children had been sent outside. Wade was there sitting with his arms crossed and his jaw tight. Evelyn stood near the stove because she needed something to do with her hands, and the coffee didn't need any more attention than it was getting. Finally, Henderson looked up. "The letter is strong," he said. "The witness signatures are the key. Both men, Aldrich and Pruitt, their sons, are still in this county." "George Pruitt," Wade said. "Hattie's husband. If we can get depositions from both sons confirming their father's testimony that they knew and acknowledged the Hayes boundary ran to the creek, we have a solid counterfiling." Henderson folded his glasses. "Leland's challenge is opportunistic. It's not based on genuine ambiguity. It's based on the hope that you don't have the resources to fight it." "Do we have the resources to fight it?" Caleb asked. Henderson looked at him evenly. "My fee is what I told you in Laramie. The rest is time and cooperation from your neighbors." He paused. "The question is whether the Pruitts and the Aldriches will stand up and say what their fathers signed." The room was quiet. "George Pruitt was out here the day after the storm fixing my barn," Caleb said. Henderson nodded. "Then I'd start there." Bob. George Pruitt said yes before Caleb finished asking. He said it standing in his own yard with his hat in his hands and his face gone serious in the way of a man being asked to do something that mattered, and he said, "Your daddy was an honest man, Caleb. My daddy knew it and I know it. You tell me where to sign." Daniel Aldrich, who was 60 and had his father's broad hands and his father's blunt way of speaking, said, "Leland's been trying to swallow this county whole for 20 years. I'd be glad to put my name on something that sticks in his throat." Henderson filed the counter documents the following week. Leland's lawyers responded because that was what Leland's lawyers did. And then the whole thing went into the slow grinding machinery of territorial law, which moved at its own pace and answered to no one's urgency. Caleb came home from the second filing trip and told Evelyn it could be months. "Then it's months," she said. "The banknote is still due in August." "I know. Even if we win the land challenge the note." "Caleb." She turned from the stove and looked at him directly. "One thing at a time. The cattle from the south pasture. How many head are we running now?" He blinked at the shift. 22. Walsh says we can move them to market in 6 weeks. And the price Wade checked last week. It covers about half. Half is not nothing. She held his gaze. And Margaret Alcott told me yesterday that her husband has been looking to lease additional grazing rights for his summer herd. This land has the grass for it. That's cash without selling a single thing. Caleb stared at her. "You talked to Margaret Alcott about our finances." "I talked to Margaret Alcott about grazing leases in general," Evelyn said. "She brought up her husband's situation herself. I just listened." She kept her voice even. "You can be angry about that if you need to be, but the math is the math." He opened his mouth, closed it, looked at the ceiling for a moment in the manner of a man asking it for patience. Then, "How much is Alcott looking to pay for grazing rights?" she told him. She watched the calculation move through his face. "That plus the cattle sale," he said slowly. "Gets you close," she said. "Not all the way, but close enough that Henderson might be able to negotiate a short extension based on demonstrated payment progress." "You've been thinking about this for a while." "I've been thinking about it since Marsh came to the porch," she said. He looked at her for a long moment, the long measuring look she knew by heart, now the one that meant he was recalibrating, taking her apart, and putting her back together with new information. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" "Because you weren't ready to hear it sooner," she said. "You needed to fight the land challenge first. A man can only carry so many battles at once." Something moved in his face. Not the almost laugh from before. Something quieter and more serious than that. "Ruth used to say something like that," he said. "Smart woman," Evelyn said, and turned back to the stove. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I'll ride to Alcott's tomorrow." The deal with Alcott was signed within the week. The cattle went to market 3 weeks later on a Tuesday morning, when the sky was high and clear, and Tommy insisted on riding out to the road to watch the herd move standing in his stirrups with his jaw set and his eyes tracking every animal with the focus of someone memorizing something important. Caleb came to stand beside Evelyn while they watched from the yard. "He's going to be a hell of a rancher," Caleb said quietly. "He already is," Evelyn said. The twist came on a Thursday afternoon in late July, and it came in the form of a woman Evelyn had never seen before, arriving in a hired buggy with 2 trunks, and the bearing of someone who believed her arrival was an event. Her name was Catherine Moore. She was Caleb's late wife's younger sister, and she had come from Denver, and she had apparently decided, based on a letter from someone in the county, whose identity Caleb could not immediately determine, that her sister's children were in need of proper supervision, and that she was the appropriate person to provide it. She said all of this in the front room, while Evelyn stood in the kitchen doorway, and the children arranged themselves around the room in various states of alarm. Sadie had gone completely still. Tommy had placed himself between Catherine and the younger children, with the instinctive positioning of a boy who did this automatically now, which broke Evelyn's heart a little to see. Catherine was not unkind. That was the difficult part. She was genuinely concerned, genuinely fond of the children, and genuinely certain that a widow's household being managed by a woman no one in the family knew was a situation that required correction. She said all of this with warmth and complete conviction. And then she looked at Evelyn and she said pleasantly, "I'm sure you've been very helpful, Miss Carter, but I'm family. I think it would be best if I took over the household from here." The room went completely silent. Evelyn looked at her. She thought about 43 cents and a road and a baby crying. She thought about 3 weeks of building something out of nothing, about Sadie's mending basket on the kitchen table, about Tommy in the barn, telling her they needed her, about a letter found at midnight in a hallway. She thought about a man looking at her across a kitchen table and saying her room should stay hers. She said carefully and evenly, "That's up to Mr. Hayes." Everyone looked at Caleb. Caleb had not moved from his chair since Catherine sat down. He had the particular stillness he got when he was thinking fast and hard underneath a surface that showed nothing. He looked at his sister-in-law, and then he looked at Evelyn, and then he looked at his children. Tommy spoke first. He stepped forward from his position and said in his flat, informational voice, "Miss Evelyn saved Clara during the storm. She fixed the kitchen. She helped Pa fight to keep the ranch." He paused. "She's staying." Catherine blinked. "I'm sure she's been wonderful, but—" "She's staying," Sadie said. She said it the same way Tommy had, not a question, not a request. A fact being stated to someone who had apparently missed it. Robert from his chair in the corner. "She makes the biscuits." Lily from behind Evelyn's skirt, where she had quietly positioned herself at some point in the last 3 minutes. "She holds Clara right." Catherine looked at the children. Then she looked at Caleb. Caleb stood up. He walked across the room and he stopped beside Evelyn in the kitchen doorway, and he said to his sister-in-law in a voice that was perfectly calm and left absolutely no room for discussion, "Catherine, you're welcome in this house for as long as you'd like to stay. You're Ruth's sister, and these are Ruth's children, and that means you're always welcome here." He paused. "But Evelyn stays. That's not something I'm willing to negotiate." The room was very quiet. Catherine looked at him for a long moment. She was reading his face the way women read faces when they're trying to understand what something means beneath what it says. Whatever she found there made her sit back slightly in her chair. "I see," she said, quietly. "I hope you do," Caleb said. Not unkind, just plain. Catherine stayed 4 days. By the end of the second day, she was sitting at the kitchen table watching Evelyn cook with an expression that had moved from suspicion to assessment to something that looked reluctantly like respect. By the third day, she was helping. By the fourth, she pulled Evelyn aside before her buggy came and said in a low voice that her brother-in-law would not hear, "Ruth would not have chosen badly, and these children have not chosen badly." She looked at Evelyn directly. "Take care of them." "I intend to," Evelyn said. Catherine nodded once. She climbed into her buggy and left without looking back, the way women left when they'd made peace with something they couldn't change and were determined to do it with dignity. The bank note came due on the 23rd of August. Henderson had negotiated a 30-day extension based on the partial payment from the cattle sale and the Alcott lease agreement, but the extension required a good faith payment that cleaned out what was left of Caleb's liquid cash and left the ranch running on exactly nothing in reserve. Evelyn knew this. She didn't say anything about it. She kept the kitchen efficient and the food stretching, and she quietly let the household expenses drop in every way that wouldn't be immediately noticed, because that was what you did when money was short, and you didn't want to scare children. Sadie noticed anyway. Of course she did. "We're being careful," Sadie said one evening, not a question. "We're always careful," Evelyn said. "More careful," Sadie said. "You've been buying less at the store. You've been making the flour stretch." She looked at Evelyn with those eyes. "How bad is it right now?" Evelyn put down the dish she was drying. She looked at Sadie, 11 years old, going on 40, carrying the weight of a girl who had learned too young that pretending things were fine when they weren't was a luxury that cost more than it was worth. "Right now, today, it's tight," she said. "In 30 days, if the land challenge goes well and the grazing lease payment comes in, it gets better." She held Sadie's gaze. "We are not losing this ranch. I need you to believe that." "How do you know?" "Because your father is fighting for it. Because Wade is fighting for it. Because Henderson is fighting for it. And because I am fighting for it." She picked the dish back up. "That's a lot of fighting." Sadie was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I know how to fight too." "I know you do," Evelyn said. "You've been doing it since before anyone asked you to." That cracked something open in Sadie's face, just for a second, just long enough for Evelyn to see the child underneath all that composed, careful armor, the one who was tired and scared and had been brave for so long, she'd almost forgotten what it felt like not to be. Evelyn put down the dish again and opened her arms. Sadie walked into them like she'd been waiting to for weeks and held on hard, and Evelyn held her back just as hard, and neither of them said anything because nothing needed saying. The land ruling came on a Friday morning in September. Henderson rode out himself to deliver it, which told Evelyn, before he said a word, that the news was good, because lawyers who brought bad news generally sent letters. He stood in the front room with the whole family arranged around him, Caleb and Wade and Tommy and Sadie and Robert, talking to fill his own nerves, and Lily holding Clara on her hip with the competence of a 5-year-old who had been practicing, and he said, "Judge Carver ruled in favor of the Hayes boundary as described in the 1873 letter. The eastern line runs to and including the western bank of Hollow Creek. Leland's challenge is dismissed." Robert said yes, and knocked over a chair. Tommy sat down on the nearest surface, which happened to be the arm of the settle, and pressed both hands to his face, exactly the way his father pressed his hands to his face, when something was more than he had words for. Wade said something that was definitely not appropriate for the children, and then immediately apologized to Evelyn, who told him she'd heard worse. Caleb didn't say anything. He looked at the document Henderson held out, and he took it, and he held it in both hands, and he stood there with his jaw working and his eyes bright, and Evelyn watched from the kitchen doorway and thought about a man's father walking a boundary line in 1873 and writing it down carefully and signing his name to it, not knowing that 40 years later it would be the thing that saved everything his son had built. Caleb looked up, across the room, at her. She held his gaze, and she nodded once, and whatever passed between them in that moment was more than a nod, and they both knew it, and neither of them said so. The full note was settled in October, with the combined proceeds of the second cattle run, and the Alcott lease, and a small amount that Wade contributed without being asked and refused to discuss, saying only that it was a loan and Caleb could pay him back in bad coffee over the next 20 years. On the last Saturday of October, Caleb asked Evelyn to walk with him. Not to do anything. Not to look at fencing or assess the pasture or discuss the household accounts. Just to walk. He asked her after supper quietly, while the children were occupied, and she said yes, and they walked out past the barn and along the south fence line in the last of the October light, which was the color of embers, low and warm and going quickly. They walked without talking for a while. The grass was dry under their feet, and the air had that particular sharpness that came before the first real cold, and somewhere across the field, a nightbird was working up to something. "I want to ask you something," Caleb said. "All right." He stopped walking. She stopped beside him. He looked at the fence line, the fence they had fixed together, the posts he and Tommy and Wade and Evelyn had set through the heat of July, and then he looked at her. "I'm not good at this," he said. saying things. Ruth always said I communicated mostly by standing near things I cared about and hoping people noticed. I noticed, Evelyn said. The corner of his mouth moved. I know you did. He turned to face her fully. I don't know what the right way is to say this. I've been thinking about it for a while, and I don't think there is a right way, so I'm just going to say it plain. Plain is fine, she said. Her heart was beating the way it did when something important was about to happen, and there was no way to prepare for it. I don't want you to stay because the children need you, he said. They do need you. But that's not why I'm asking. He looked at her steadily, the Creekwater eyes clear and direct and not hiding a thing. I want you to stay because I need you. Because this place feels like itself again when you're in it. Because I wake up in the morning and the first thing that makes sense is knowing you're downstairs starting the coffee. He paused. Because I am not the same man I was in June, and most of the change is because of you, and I don't want to go back. Evelyn stood very still. I'm not asking you to replace Ruth, he said. I'm not asking you to be anything other than what you are. I'm asking you to stay, to be here, to let this be yours the same way it's mine. He held her gaze. If you'll have it. The October light was burning low across the field. She thought about a road and a gate and 43 cents. She thought about every place she had left and every place that had left her. She thought about a baby laughing and a boy in a barn telling her the truth and a girl walking into her arms in a kitchen. She thought about what it felt like to stop running. I'll have it, she said. He exhaled. Just once, long and slow, the way she'd heard him exhale that very first day when Clara finally ate the sound of a man releasing something he'd been holding for too long. He reached out and took her hand. Not dramatically. Just took it the way you took hold of something you weren't going to let go of. She let him. They stood there in the October field while the light went down and the cold came up and the night bird finally committed to its song and Hollow Creek Ranch settled around them in the particular way that places settled when the people in them had finally stopped fighting, being where they were. 3 weeks later, on a still November morning, with the first frost on the ground and cornbread in the oven, and Clara pulling herself along the furniture with a determination that suggested walking was going to happen, whether anyone was ready or not. Caleb Hayes stood in his own kitchen and looked at the woman who had walked in out of nothing with 43 cents and a worn-out bag and changed every single thing. And he said in front of all 4 of his children and his brother, who had ridden over for breakfast and was pretending not to pay attention, Evelyn Carter, I would like you to be my wife, if you're willing. Robert fell off his chair. Sadie grabbed the table with both hands, and her face did something it hadn't done in longer than anyone wanted to count. It opened up wide and unguarded like a door finally swinging free of a frame that had been warping it shut. Tommy looked at Evelyn with those gray-green eyes and waited, the way he always waited, still and serious, and ready for whatever the truth was going to be. Lily said, "Say yes, Miss Evelyn." Evelyn looked at Caleb, at his steady face and his scarred hands and his eyes that saw everything and hid nothing, and had been looking at her like she belonged here since long before either of them had the words for it. "Yes," she said. Wade made the sound he always made when he was trying not to show that something had gotten to him, which meant it had completely gotten to him. Robert climbed back into his chair and announced that this meant there would be cake, which was not necessarily a logical conclusion, but was the kind of conclusion that 6-year-olds drew, and no one in the room had the heart to correct. Clara let go of the table leg she'd been gripping, took one single, teetering, furious, magnificent step across the kitchen floor, and sat down hard. Then she looked up at all of them with an expression of complete triumph. And Evelyn Carter, who had walked in off a dusty Wyoming road with nothing but hunger and a worn-out bag and the stubborn refusal to keep moving when something mattered, laughed. She laughed the way she hadn't laughed in years, full and real, and without a single piece of herself held back, and the sound of it filled that kitchen from the floor to the ceiling and went out through the walls into the cold November morning, into the land that was theirs, into the life that had been waiting all along for her to stop running long enough to claim it. She had come to Hollow Creek with 43 cents and no plan, and a baby crying in a house that wasn't hers. She was leaving that life behind for good, and she was never, not for one single day, going to regret it.